So we come in our journey through the Gospel of Matthew to the 14th chapter, and we have hit a decidedly symbolic part of this gospel. Jesus has been teaching metaphorically about the reign of heaven. Called it the pearl of great price. Called it that little bit of leaven that can change everything, that leavens the whole loaf. Called it that tiny little seed, the mustard seed, that produces this incredible life, this huge plant. Very symbolic. He feeds 5,000 people. Later, he'll feed 4,000 people. Matthew's the only one who has both. Symbolic stories with one very real story in the middle. John the Baptist is beheaded. So in the midst of this symbolism, we have this story that we're reading today about Jesus walking in the water. And for me, I think about this as a dream. If it was your dream, what would this text of Scripture have to say to you? Would you listen for the Word of God as it speaks to you? Immediately, Jesus made the disciples get into a boat and go ahead from him to the other side, and then he dismissed the crowds. After he dismissed those crowds, he went up on the mountain all by himself to pray. And when evening came, he was there alone. By this time, the boat, battered by the waves, was far from the land, for the wind was against them. And early in the morning, Jesus came walking toward the disciples on the sea. And when the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were terrified. They said, "It's a ghost." They cried out with fear. But immediately Jesus spoke to them and said, "Take heart, it's me. Do not be afraid." Peter answered him, "Well, Lord, if it's you, then command me to come out to you on the water." "Come," he said. So Peter got out of the boat, started walking on the water, and came toward Jesus. But then he noticed the strong wind, and he became frightened. And beginning to sink down, he cried out, "Lord, save me." Jesus immediately reached out his hand, caught him, and said to him, "You who have little trust, why do you doubt?" When they got into the boat, the wind ceased, and those in the boat worshipped him, saying, "Truly, you are the Son of God." Hear what the Spirit is saying to our church. Seems to me that it's just plain difficult to follow Jesus. The disciples have figured that out by now. They know it's difficult. I mean, the man is demanding. Love your enemy. Pray for those who persecute you. No anger. Blessed are the meek. Demanding. Jesus is pretty hard to follow. But Peter found a way, you know. Peter found a way in our dream. He found a way to live that life that would carry him through the wind and the waves. And here's how he did it. When he was called out onto the sea, Jesus had his attention. "Lord, call me." And Jesus called him, so he goes out. You can picture this as he's walking out towards Jesus. And then he notices the wind and the waves. Turns his eyes away from Jesus, and he begins to sink down. And he calls out, "Help me." Jesus reaches out, grabs his hand, and now Peter's attention is back on Jesus, and he begins to come up to the surface of the sea. Now, it's an important lesson that Peter learned. Keep your eye on Jesus, and I just thought I'd help you learn it. Because you see, there's an eye here, right? There's an eye on the peacock feather, and if you're going to stay anywhere close to keeping this in balance, you're going to have to keep your eye on that eye, okay? You watch that eye, you're going to be able to keep it balanced on your finger. If you turn away, I mean, you know, it's just going to fall over, okay? Now, here's the amazing thing. It even works. Okay? Try it. It's fun. You know, keep your eye on the eye because that's how you stay in balance, focused on Jesus. It can stay with you for a while. First time I preached this particular illustration was in my seminary in 1993. I went 5 years later for a sort of a study leave, and my Old Testament professor saw me out on the quad, and he said, "Sam, how are you doing? I still have that peacock feather. It reminds me to keep my eye on Jesus." I hope it serves you that way. It's still hard, though, to follow Jesus. It's very hard to follow Jesus because in order to be able to live out the kind of life with the high standards that Jesus seems to demand, well, it requires a real focus, a change of knowledge. That's what Jesus is all about in the Gospel according to Matthew. He's about imparting a kind of knowledge that changes the way you look at the world, turns things upside down. It's the rich and the wealthy that have a low spot in the world. It's the poor and the humble that have the high spot in the world. There's a way in which Jesus tries to shift how you're looking at things. And then Jesus also calls you into a kind of spirit formation. I mean, he talks about prayer and the way it's intended to form you. He expects that you're going to go through a process that will allow spirit to shape you in some way. In fact, he does it too. He was there on the mountain, meeting God in prayer before he went out onto the sea. And it's not like Jesus went up to the mountain and just started, praying hard, which is something like that, No, Jesus was opening to the presence of the God that he knew, that he was touched by. And that's not easy to do, to walk into that kind of formative process. It's really not all that easy to follow Jesus. Especially since Jesus is calling us to reach out for the pearl of great price, to reach out for that little piece of yeast that is going to change everything. It's going to crack open the way society looks at the world. It's going to make culture shift and change, do things differently, so that people are able to live in a way that allows them to thrive. Cracks open a culture. That's what Jesus is about, starting a revolution of sorts. Hard to follow Jesus, because what Jesus is looking to do is to let people live the kind of life that lets them experience the pleasure of work that matters. It lets them experience the pleasure of living a life and living into relationships that are sculpted by the presence of God, the God of all creation. It's a revolution that Jesus is after, and that makes it difficult to follow Jesus. It's not only the knowledge, though. It's not only the mindset. It's not only the spiritual formation that makes it hard. The truth is, it's dangerous. The only thing that isn't symbolic in this text is the death of John the Baptist. The death of a man that was seeking that same revolution, that opportunity to break open culture in such a way that people could live free, allowed to worship the way they cared to worship, allowed to be touched by the presence of God, allowed to be sculpted by the strength and the power of the Spirit of God. It's dangerous. That's what the dream's about. That's what that dream is about. This whole story is about reaching out and making deep changes, and they're dangerous because you're stepping out onto the chaotic sea. And that's where the raw material is, where the danger is, but the raw creative potential is. Instead of living inside that boat where the disciples were, beat back and forth by the waves, wondering if their boat was going to be able to take it. Nervous, scared, plugging the holes, doing everything they could. Instead of staying in that safe, secure place, Jesus was calling them out to a revolution. Calling them out to step out into chaos, into the unknown, and to walk towards him, grabbing hold of the pearl of great price. It's hard to follow Jesus. It's hard to get out of the boat. Libyans have gotten out of the boat, though. The Egyptians have gotten out of the boat. Iranians, Yemens, they're getting out of the boat. They're reaching for that pearl of great price. They're reaching for the leaven that's going to change everything. It's going to allow them to break the hold of despotic rule so that they don't live in fear, but instead seek to thrive. Now, of course, we're very nervous about this. And I understand that because I'm worried that they may notice the wind and the waves and start to sink. But right now, they're reaching for the pearl of great price. And I think all our hearts stand with them. But I'm not preaching to them this morning. I'm preaching to us. The Spirit has really read this text for us, and so my question is, will we step out of the boat? Will we have the courage to reach out for that leaven that's going to change everything? Because I feel the wind blowing. The wind's been blowing. Our society has been shaking. We keep trying to plug the holes in our boat, and I suppose we can do that for a time. But it is giving us pause, making us nervous. I mean, we are part of the economic, social, technological structures that allowed the despotic rule in the Middle East these 40 years. The things that we have, the things that we do are integrally connected to that society as well. Now, this isn't about guilt. You know, the liberal preacher that stands up and kind of wants to whip America for this awful thing that America has done, I don't think it's useful. This isn't really about guilt, but this is about a deeper kind of renewal, a call towards a different kind of society. Call to reach out for the pearl of great price that this nation has been reaching towards for decades and decades. Some of you know that I teach preaching at the seminary, and I listened to 8 4-minute sermons on Thursday. One of them given by a young man who's a Marine. It was really quite startling. Began by raising his right hand and reciting the oath that he took when he joined the Marine Corps. And in that oath, he promised to protect and defend the Constitution of the United States. He pointed out that the President takes an oath to protect and defend the Constitution of the United States. Senators and congressmen, they take oaths to protect and defend the Constitution of the United States. Nowhere, anywhere does it say they're going to protect and defend the security and comfort of the American people. He has a right to worry. He's put his life on the line. He's worried that we're not protecting that pearl of great price that we've been reaching for, that leaven that was supposed to leaven the whole lump, to move through the world and allow freedom, people to thrive going forward. No. He worries that we've focused too much on our safety and our security to the point that we have lost sight of the pearl of great price. It's hard to follow Jesus. Hard to step out. But we've lost meaning here. We've lost any sense of why it is that we've come together of a people. I don't mean that everybody has, but with the society as a whole, it feels sick. I don't usually pay a whole lot of attention to pop culture. But because I needed examples for this sermon this week, I decided that I'd dive in a little bit. Come to find out that one of the big things going on is Rush Limbaugh has decided that Michelle Obama is fat, like this is any of our business. And then I love this one. Charlie Sheen, okay, his dad was, the great liberal icon president in West Wing, but Charlie Sheen is apparently in the most popular TV show on television, okay? But he's been misbehaving, and apparently he's in a fight with the writer. I don't know what it's all about, but he got onto the television show and began to rant and rave about how awful this person was. And lo and behold, CBS and Warner Brothers decided that they would shut the thing down, and then he gets on again, and he tells everybody they've got to, get behind him, for justice sake. And my goodness gracious, all this while people got out of the boat in Egypt and Libya. we're missing the meaning. You've heard me rant and rave about the girls who are texting or sexting in our county. Right next door, there's a brothel, massage parlor. We lose meaning because there's nothing in the midst of our lives and our hearts that's going to be something we'd be willing to give our life for. We'd be willing to forfeit the life so that our life has meaning. Jesus is calling us to get out of the boat, and it is hard to follow Jesus. Hard because we notice the wind and the waves all the time. We notice the wind in our lives. We worry about, and appropriately, we worry about whether or not our lives are going to be able to be lived in the same way they've been lived. We're concerned about our health. We're concerned about the friends we have, what's going to happen to them. We're concerned about the people we know that don't have jobs. We're trying to figure out how to plug the hole. We worry, and we're not that enamored of the idea of getting out of the boat into that raw material, that creative place where God might be. And Peter found a way. Peter found a way, kept his eye on Jesus. The question is, what on earth does that mean? I think I know what Matthew would say. Because for Matthew, Jesus is way more than a teacher. Way more than somebody who is nice, and so therefore you should be nice. No, for Matthew, Jesus was almost an iconic figure. The very presence of wisdom itself, as though you see all creation in this person. This is the wisdom metaphor. Jesus is the one where the divine, where the presence and the power of the God who created all things touches the earth, kisses and embraces the earth. And when Jesus was looking into the eye of Peter, it was the one who gave Peter life that was gazing within him. And gazing with deep love, calling him forth into something better, something whole. And because the God of heaven and earth is willing to be seen and opening God's arms and eyes to you, you can walk on water too. At least in your dream. Now, what would the dream mean if it was yours? To get out of the boat and walk on the water. To have the courage to live in a way that'll open you to new possibilities. We can't do that alone. We simply can't do it alone, find that way all by ourselves. That's why Jesus called 12 together. 12 in the Bible, means the whole. Jesus called them together and called them together to get out of the boat. To serve this reign of heaven, this yeast that can change everything. So that the world can move to the next beautiful expression of God's love. That's what Peter saw. Peter saw the pearl of great price in the eyes of Jesus. And as long as he did, he walked steady over the waters towards the loving arms of God. So, you can take home your peacock feather. Alice it on your finger, amaze and delight your friends. But I hope it also reminds you that you can keep your eye on the very presence of the one that gives you life and breath. And as you do, you in fact can crack open the fear that binds you. And as we do that together, we will walk on water.